Well, another Sunday has come and gone, but the best is yet to come in this Week 14. Tomorrow night's Houston at New England game is a gem. Really looking forward to that one. New England a 3.5-point favorite on BETDAQ. Let's talk about some of the games we just saw, though, starting with the game we just saw, the Sunday night game. Green Bay pulling out a 27-20 win over Detroit. Big win for the Packers, obviously. It moves them to 9-4. Sole possession now, first place in the NFC North. But if I was a Packers fan, I would be very, very concerned watching this team because tonight was just more evidence that Green Bay is not near the offense they once were. I mean, they're not even in the same ballpark. Green Bay is a below-average NFL offense right now. And the defense has outplayed the offense all season. The defense was clearly missing Clay Matthews tonight. They were not able to pressure Matt Stafford much. But really, the defense, I mean, Green Bay was down 14-3 before the defense produced a turnover, scored a defensive touchdown. I mean, produced a turnover. Stafford dropped the ball, but still was scooped up and ran in for a touchdown. So you could say the defense outperformed the offense again tonight. Certainly another unimpressive performance from the Green Bay offense. I know it was in the elements, snowing for most of the game. But Matt Stafford outperformed Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers throwing for 173 yards. Both those guys, of course, playing in the same conditions. Green Bay actually has a slightly better defense than Detroit this season. But that shouldn't be a surprise if we've seen the Packers play this year. 14 weeks of the season gone now. They're not in the top half of the league in total offense, points scored. They've only topped 31 points once this year. That's tied with a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, for instance. This is a team that averaged 35 last year, but it is what it is. This is not week 5 or 6. We've played 14 weeks of the season. This is a very average to below average offense. They're a dink and dunk offense with a bad offensive line, with an average to slightly above average defense when Clay Matthews is in the lineup at least. And I don't think that's going to be good enough to have any success in the playoffs. So after watching that game tonight, even though the Packers won, and I was back in the Packers -7, ended up with a push, sort of a gross push. Detroit kicked a field goal with 16 seconds left to ruin the win. And so, but I came away sort of with my mind made up on the Packers. I think it's too late for them to turn it around. This is not a serious contender in the NFC, I don't believe. Of course, some people disagree with me. Watching the talking heads after the game, and I heard them saying, oh, rest of the NFC, you're in trouble now. Green Bay showed tonight they can run the ball. I'm not sure that's what happened. I mean, Green Bay ran the ball some tonight, no doubt about it. It was in the elements, but Detroit can be run on, not a good run defense. And listen, all in all, and I was rooting for the Packers tonight. As I said, I was backing them -7. Very, very unimpressive, but that's been par for the course for the Green Bay Packers this season. Still, at 9-4, like we said, now in the lead in the NFC North, that's because Chicago Bears dropped a critical game today to the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota, by the way, hanging in there in the playoff race, now 7-6. Minnesota winning despite their quarterback play. Speaking of bad quarterback play, Jay Cutler pulled a Jay Cutler today. Last year the Bears collapsed. 6-2 to start the year, missed the playoffs. Everyone blamed it on Cutler's injury, assuming that, if Cutler were in there, of course they would have still been a good team. Well, fact of the matter is, the Bears cannot be trusted so long as Jay Cutler's the quarterback. This is another, you're reminded of this periodically throughout Cutler's career. You're reminded again today, 22 of 44, 2 interceptions, and then the unforgivable sin in NFL football, took himself out of the game with just less than 4 minutes left. Bears had the ball, down 7 points in a crucial game, a must-win game. Cutler took himself out of the game with some sort of neck injury, but the neck injury isn't serious enough to put his status for next week in question, at least not according to the Bears and the Bears medical staff, maybe throwing Cutler under the bus a little bit, releasing that information. Cutler himself, when he spoke post-game, he just sort of grabbed his neck, said, yeah, it's a little stiff, we'll monitor it over the next few days. I guarantee you there's some quarterbacks in the NFL who would not have come out with that. I mean, if it's not serious enough here on Sunday night for a status next week to be in question, it's not serious, right? It was after a hard hit by Everson Griffin. I don't see how we're not left to conclude that Cutler turned coward. I mean, Everson Griffin hit him hard. Cutler finished that series, the 2 plays, chose not to go in the next series. Like I said, when they were down 7, needed a touchdown. So he pulled a Jay Cutler, turned the ball over a couple times, ended up voluntarily sitting out of the game with a questionable injury. Not the first time he's done that. Remember the playoffs a couple of years ago. So I don't know how anybody trusts the Bears the rest of this season or in the playoffs, or as long as Jay Cutler is the quarterback there. And Lovie Smith has sort of gone all in. I know it's a cliche with Jay Cutler, but he really has. He experienced some bad quarterback play in the beginning of his tenure at Chicago, even though they made a Super Bowl with Rex Grossman at quarterback. And he thought Jay Cutler was the answer. Right? You could tell Lovie Smith when he first acquired Jay Cutler, but I think it's starting to dawn on him now because Cutler, he threw more passes today. It was the first time he's topped 40 passes since September of last season. Chicago has largely been winning this year. They've been 28th, 29th in the league in pass yards per game all season long. Even though people have talked a lot about the acquisition of Brandon Marshall and what that's done to the Bears passing game, fact of the matter is Bears don't pass for that many yards this year. The Bears have been winning with the running game. They've taken the ball out of Jay Cutler's hands. I think they figured that out. For some reason, they let Jay Cutler lose it for him again today. They did not take it out of his hands. Now, that's because Minnesota jumped out to a big early lead, sort of took Chicago out of their game plan. Still, though, an incredibly disappointing result, obviously, for Chicago. As for Minnesota, we mentioned they're 7-6 now. They've got to do something about their quarterback situation. I mean, we're talking a lot about quarterbacks here, but Minnesota, Christian Ponder has been so bad over the last month. And coming into this game today, I talked about it on the preview video we did for the game. You could sort of see the Bears were sinking. They're going on the road in division. You wanted to back Minnesota today. At least I did. You wanted to bet against the Bears in this situation. But how could you thought? With Christian Ponder, as poorly as he's been playing, going up against that Bears defense that leads the NFL in turnovers, at least that was my thinking. I feel like Chicago's sinking, but how could you back Minnesota and their quarterback, Christian Ponder? Sure enough, Christian Ponder, 91 yards and an interception today. They totally won in spite of Christian Ponder. Adrian Peterson, 154 yards, 2 touchdowns today. That gives him 1,600 yards for the year. 3 games left. Only needs 400 to get to 2,000. Only needs 506 to break Eric Dickerson's single-season NFL rushing record of 2,105 yards. Absolutely incredible. Only a year removed from a major knee injury. And Adrian Peterson is having the best season of his career to this point. The Vikings are going to have to really ride him. They probably have to win out to make the postseason. Excuse me. Vikings probably have to win out to make the postseason. They're going to really have to ride Peterson. I believe they should go with Joe Webb at quarterback. At this point, it's, do you want to try to improve and do you want to try to make the playoffs, or are you more concerned with Christian Ponder's confidence, Christian Ponder's development? I understand they drafted Ponder in the first round last year, so I get that they're invested in this guy. I mean, Rick Spielman, the general manager, that was his call to draft Ponder. So if Ponder doesn't work out, that makes him look bad. Even though the Vikings aren't overly financially committed to Ponder, this is the regime that drafted this guy. They want it to work out. But, I mean, it's obvious now. It's been obvious ever since the 4th game of the season. Ponder got off to a nice start of the season, or at least he protected the ball early, but he's been an absolute disaster recently. A disaster again today. Vikings still winning, though, 21-14 over the Chicago Bears. Another major result I want to talk about in the NFC playoff picture, really in the NFC and the AFC playoff picture, was the Dallas Cowboys' 20-19 win over the Cincinnati Bengals. Dallas playing after the tragedy, of course. A couple of days ago, you've probably heard by now, Josh Brent, their defensive tackle, was apparently intoxicated behind the wheel, got into an accident. Linebacker Jerry Brown was killed. Josh Brent now in jail, being charged with manslaughter, with involuntary manslaughter. So terrible situation. Josh Brent was a part-time starter for the Cowboys. Jerry Brown a reserve, but still apparently very popular on the team. Horrible situation. A lot of Dallas players were in tears today, very emotional, and they pulled out a huge win. But this has to be a more gutting loss for Cincinnati, or just as gutting of a loss for Cincinnati as it is a great win for Dallas, because the Bengals had a 9-point lead in this game with 7 minutes left. They were up 19-10 in the 4th quarter in a game they had to win. Coming into today, Cincinnati was tied with Pittsburgh for the final wild card spot in the AFC. Now, Pittsburgh lost themselves today. We'll talk about that in a second. But huge game for Cincinnati. They blew it in the end. Big game for Dallas as well. Dallas has lost a lot of games like this season. Seems like every time Dallas is involved in a close game, they lose. They won this one. They improved to 7-6. Still a game behind the New York Giants, because the Giants pulled out a nice win over the New Orleans Saints today, 52-27. High-scoring game, pretty much what you expected to see. I mean, you never, I guess, expect to see 52 points, but we knew the Saints' defense was awful. We knew the Saints' offense was really good, and that's what it was. Saints' defense is awful. Their offense is really good. Turns out their defense is worse than their offense is good. The Giants winning that one going away. The other NFC East team in the playoff hunt, Washington, also pulling out a win over Baltimore today, 31-28 in overtime. Redskins had to come from behind. They were 8 points down late in the game. The big news, though, Robert Griffin III sustaining a knee injury. He was planning to throw, slipped on the turf. Now, we've already heard results. It's very odd. It's still Sunday night now, or I guess it's technically, it's 1 a.m. or whatever it is, but we've already heard the results of Robert Griffin's MRI, and apparently it is negative. No ACL tear, but they don't think he's going to be ready to go next week, at least at this time. He's going to have to be off of it for a few days. That's what we're hearing. Now, Robert Griffin III already sustained a concussion early this year, and that was also a situation. After that concussion, Shanahan took a little bit of criticism for maybe rushing him back in there because, of course, everybody's so concerned about concussions now. And this is another situation where an injury, and we're already hearing the injury dispelled the same night of. It feels to me that the Redskins, maybe it's Mike Shanahan, maybe it's somebody. This feels like to me the Redskins are trying to sort of, ignore Griffin's injuries. It's almost like they don't want him to be injury prone. Maybe they don't want him to think he's injury prone. But this guy tore his ACL in college. The way he plays, taking all those hits, enjoy Robert Griffin while he lasts, because you never know. This guy could be a shooting star type thing, because if his running ability is taken away, he's still an NFL quarterback, but he won't be near the player he is now. I mean, so much of what the Redskins do, of what Robert Griffin does on offense, is because their devastating running game, number one in the NFL in rush yards per game. A lot of that running game is Griffin himself, who's already broken the NFL rushing record for a quarterback. That spread option attack, if you took that element away from Washington and turned them into a conventional drop-back passing offense, Robert Griffin would not be the player he is now. So you got to keep an eye on this situation. I mean, this is his first season. He's getting dinged up a little bit here, takes a lot of shots, might not be able to play next week. Washington facing Cleveland next week. Cleveland won again today. The Browns on a roll. 3 wins in a row now for the Cleveland Browns. Washington, as we said, tied with Dallas, a game back of the New York Giants in the NFC East, a game back of Seattle for the final wild card spot in the NFC. So huge, huge game for Washington next week. We'll see if they have RG3. Now, Kirk Cousins, the rookie from Michigan State, he came in, played great the last couple of minutes of that game, made a great play on the touchdown pass, quarterback draw on the 2-point conversion, ran it in himself. So maybe the Redskins will be all right with Cousins, but I don't know. If I was a Washington fan, I would be hoping that RG3 got back in that lineup as soon as possible. Now, there were 3 really shocking results in the NFL today, at least shocking to me. Carolina beating Atlanta 30-20. I guess that wasn't as shocking to me. We talked about it on the live stream before the game started. I had a Carolina sort of feeling in that game just based on the fact that it was a suspicious line. 11-1 Atlanta facing 3-9 Carolina, the same Panthers who had just lost to the worst team in the league, the Kansas City Chiefs. Yet Atlanta's only 3.5-point favorite, and the public is all over Atlanta. Those situations, don't like those at all. At least don't like those if you're going to bet on the public side. But it was hard to really make a case for Carolina, so I decided to leave it alone. But the Panthers did win today, dominated that game, up 23-0 at one point. And that's the NFL for you. I mean, a team who just lost to the worst team in the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs, who were the only one-win team in the league before they beat the Panthers. They were the worst team. Beats a team who has the best record in the NFL. The Falcons tied with Houston for the best record in the league. So it's just an unpredictable league. It's part of what makes it so great. Certainly Carolina beating Atlanta 30-20 today. I mean, I thought Carolina plus 3.5 might be a good bet. I don't think anybody could have thought that Carolina would be up 23-0 at one point in that game. Now, the other game was a genuine surprise to me. To me, this was the biggest surprise of the day. Talked about during the show, we heard a couple of people mention Carolina. I sort of had a little Carolina feel. Philadelphia, which is the other game I'm going to get to in a second. There was a big Philadelphia line move this morning. I tweeted, I got some information this morning that a lot of money in the 2 hours before kickoff was placed on the Eagles in that Philadelphia-Tampa Bay game. So there was some Eagles love there right before kickoff, but I didn't hear anybody talk about liking the San Diego Chargers on the road against Pittsburgh, even though San Diego was a big underdog. 9.5 was that number on BETDAQ. Not only did the Chargers cover, they beat the Steelers in the game the Steelers had to have. I mean, San Diego won that game comfortably, 34-24. Don't let the final score fool you. Pittsburgh's 24 points. Some empty yards and empty touchdowns at the end of that game after San Diego backed off on defense. The San Diego defense dominated the Pittsburgh Steelers offense in that game. And, if you're a Steelers fan, I'm sure you thought, well, Roethlisberger's back. We pulled out that win over Baltimore without Roethlisberger. It's all gravy now. Well, where are you left now? I mean, Pittsburgh, fortunately for them, Cincinnati also lost today. So that Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game that's upcoming might decide the final wild card spot in the AFC, even though, hard as it is to believe, the New York Jets at 6-7 are still in contention. Jets beating the Jags today. 3 losing teams left on their schedule. If they win out, they could still make the postseason. But extremely surprising result in Pittsburgh today. The Steelers losing a home game to the San Diego Chargers, who had been awful, just awful for the last several weeks. The other surprise, I mentioned it briefly a second ago, the Philadelphia Eagles beating Tampa 23-21. The Eagles, this snaps an 8-game losing streak for them. They had not been competitive really at all. I mean, they only lost by 5 to Dallas last week, but that's because they returned a punt with 30 seconds left. The Eagles have been non-competitive for the last couple of months. Tampa has been playing great. It was in Tampa. Tampa took an 11-point lead in the fourth quarter of that game. But folks, if you had any doubts about how bad the Tampa secondary was, today should put to rest all those doubts, because we've seen Nick Foles play a couple of games this year, and sure, he's a rookie, so maybe he's just improved at a rapid rate. But the fact that Nick Foles threw for 381 yards, 2 touchdown passes in the last 4 minutes, including one on the last play of the game. Listen, I chalk that more up to a defense that was ranked last in the NFL in pass yards per game allowed coming into the game. That is the Tampa Bay Bucs. And Greg Schiano, I've talked this year about how I love the way he's done things. He ran off Kellen Winslow, who led the team in receptions last year, ran off Brian Price before the start of the season. Then he ran off Aqib Talib during the season. Talib also viewed as sort of an attitude problem or a trouble guy by a lot of people, was quickly snatched up by New England. Well, Talib was the Bucs' best cover corner, and while I think it's admirable that Schiano let him go, and that's probably a big reason the Bucs have so turned it around this year. They're just a different team if you watch them play. Last year they were a team that laid down and quit on their coach Raheem Morris, lost their final 10 games, and this year they're not that way at all. They've been in all their games. They're a very entertaining team. They fight, they play hard, but you have to question now Schiano's decision. I mean, they're so bad in the secondary, they could really use a guy like Aqib Talib. Probably knocked them out of the playoff race today, losing that game to Philadelphia, a huge crippling loss for the Tampa Bay Bucs. Lost that game 23-21, as we said, on a last-second touchdown pass. The final result. A good thing it's the final result, because as you can tell, I'm slipping here, stumbling over my words, starting to cough. But the final result I want to talk about today is, in my opinion, the most remarkable result of the day. Not because of who won, because I thought they were going to win. I was actually backing Seattle -10. But the Seattle Seahawks, 58-0 over the Arizona Cardinals. 58-0. Arizona, 8 turnovers. John Skelton, how's this for a stat line? 11 for 22. 74 yards. 4 interceptions. Ryan Lindley came in, threw for 59 yards on 17 pass attempts. Arizona, 154 total yards. They have lost 9 straight games. What else can you say? Russell Wilson was pulled with 25 minutes left in this game. Matt Flynn finally getting some playing time in Seattle. Both Marshawn Lynch and Robert Turbin going over 100 yards. Lynch also rushing for 3 touchdowns. Okay, incredibly impressive on the part of the Seattle Seahawks, obviously. The Seahawks have been getting better and better throughout the season. They've been the best home team in the NFL this season. They're now 6-0, and more importantly, 6-0 against the number at home. They're almost unbeatable at home, at least it seems that way. But the Arizona Cardinals, I mean, this is beyond Seattle and Seattle playing well. Listen, I think Ken Wisenhunt is a good coach. I've always thought that since he took over at Arizona. Obviously, we didn't know what kind of coach he was before he got the Arizona job, but had to be impressed with what he's done with the Cardinals, taking them to a Super Bowl. This a downtrodden franchise, a doormat throughout most of their existence. But I don't know how you keep Wisenhunt on after this. So after what this has become, 9 straight losses, 58-0 against a division opponent. How do you look at the fans in the eye because you can't fire all the players? That's the thing. You say, yeah, the coach is the scapegoat. Well, the coach has to be the scapegoat. That's because, you can get rid of a few of your players, but most of them you can't. When you look at the Arizona Cardinals, even if there's high roster turnover after this season, there probably will be, there's going to be about 30 of those guys. The bulk of those guys are going to be back on the team next year. It's going to be the same group of guys generally. You have some different guys, and I'm not minimizing additions and subtractions of players. What I'm saying is at some point, you've got to, you can change direction at the top. You can change the coaching staff, and we've seen in many situations that have instant results. Jim Harbaugh taking over the San Francisco 49ers is the one off the top of my head, but to me, Ken Whisenhunt has to be done now in Arizona. I mean, this team obviously quit today. You can't lose 58-0 without, stop quitting. I'm trying to think of a better way to put it, because you don't want to say, obviously, they're professional athletes. You don't want to say they just quit. They did not appear to match the intensity of their opponent. I'll put it that way. Wasn't the only one who thought that. Don't know if you saw Larry Fitzgerald Sr., a sports writer, of course, who's the father of Larry Fitzgerald, the great Cardinals wide receiver, take to Twitter after the game, talking about how this is the only time this has happened to his son since they were beaten 70-some-odd-6 while he was in high school, and Fitzgerald Sr. then took his son out of that high school. Okay, that's what he put on Twitter. So obviously you can't take him out of the Arizona Cardinals, but Arizona is an embarrassment now, and you could go on and on about this game, the different statistical oddities. Seattle, a franchise record for points. They've never scored 58 points before. Biggest win in franchise history, all that. The most amazing stat of this game, and it's still, I shake my head when I look at this, but it's true. I checked it and double-checked it, went over and looked at his record after I heard this. Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, of course, he coached in the NFL, then had a long, successful tenure with USC. 9 years at USC, couple of national championships. I mean, just year in and year out, a power. Now, like most college teams, USC played a lot of weak sisters, powder puff teams, won a lot of games big against teams like San Jose State. Don't know why Kansas State popped in my head. Teams like that. But every college team does that. However, how about this? Pete Carroll, in his entire coaching career, his previous NFL stint, and his 9 years at USC, he has only had one win more lopsided than this. In 2008, USC beat Washington State 66-0. I can't even believe that, because USC, they had so many lopsided wins in Carroll's 9 years. I mean, they beat teams 40-0 all the time, it seemed like. In his coaching career, he's only had one bigger win than today's 58-0 win over Arizona Cardinals. To me, that says it all. That is incredible. 58-0. Want to say that again. Well, that's about all I saw today. That's about all that caught my eye anyway. Plenty of more interesting results that happened. We'll get more into those later in the week here over the next couple of days. One more game left in this Week 14. As we said earlier, it is the best game of the week, in my opinion. The Houston Texans going on the road to face the New England Patriots. New England a 3.5 point favorite on BETDAQ. We'll be having a preview of that game up on the site here in a matter of hours. Until then, for BETDAQ NFL, I'm John Arnette, and I'm going to sleep.